The forest was burning behind her, and Elara Vane did not look back. Smoke chased her through the black trees faster than any wolf could run. Somewhere behind that smoke was Greywater Hold, the only home she had ever known, and somewhere in Greywater Hold was her father, and she did not know if he was still breathing. "Run," he had told her, both hands gripping her shoulders so hard they left bruises she would carry for weeks. "Run north. Don't stop. Don't shift unless you have to. And when you reach him, say the words exactly as I taught you. Don't just watch. Be part of the story." Hit that like button and tell me where you're joining from in the comments. Now, let's keep going. "Papa, come with me." "There's no time, Elara. Winterfen. Say it and nothing else until he believes you. Now go. Go." She had gone. She had left him standing in the doorway of a hold, already catching fire at its edges, with Iron Fang riders pouring over the north wall like a flood of black iron. And she had not looked back then either, because if she had looked back, she would never have made her legs move again. 3 days. 3 days of running on torn feet, sleeping in tree hollows, drinking from streams she wasn't sure were clean, and one long terrible night where she'd had no choice but to let the wolf take her just to outrun the riders who'd picked up her scent. She had never shifted in fear before. She had never known it could feel like dying and being born in the same breath. Now the trees were thinning. Now there was a wall ahead of her, black stone rising up out of the mist like the spine of some sleeping giant, and torches burning along its top, and men with spears turning toward the sound of her ragged footsteps. "Blackthorn Keep," her father's voice said in her memory. "If Greywater falls, you go to Blackthorn. You go to the Alpha King. Tell him nothing but Winterfen, and he will listen." She staggered the last 100 yards with her lungs on fire, and her father's sealed letter clutched so tight against her chest that her knuckles had gone white around it. A letter she had carried 3 days and never once broken the wax on, because he had told her plainly it wasn't hers to open. And she reached the great iron-bound doors of Blackthorn Keep just as her legs finally decided they had carried her far enough, and she fell against them instead of knocking, because she no longer had the strength to lift her own fist. The doors opened before she hit the ground. A hand caught her arm, a big hand, rough with old scars, strong enough to hold her whole weight without seeming to notice the effort. Elara looked up into the face of a man who filled the doorway the way a mountain fills a valley, and for one dizzy moment she thought she had run 3 days and died at the end of it, because surely no living man's eyes could be that cold and that watchful at once. "Who are you?" the man said. It wasn't a question, it was a wall with words in it. She had rehearsed this. She had rehearsed it across 100 miles of dark forest, saying it to the trees, saying it to the stars, saying it so many times the words had worn smooth as river stones. But now, standing in front of him, with smoke still clinging to her hair and her father's blood, she realized only now, looking down at her own hands, that some of the red on them was not dirt. She found she could only whisper it. "My father sent me to be your wife." The man went still, not the stillness of surprise. The stillness of a predator that has just heard something it does not like in the dark. "You have the wrong keep," he said, and started to close the door. Elara jammed her shoulder into the gap before her body understood what her mind had decided. Pain flared up her arm where the wood caught her, and she didn't care. "Please, he told me to come to you. He told me you would listen if I said one word, and only one, and I have walked 3 days to say it to your face, so I am going to say it, whether you close this door on my hand or not." Something in her voice, not the words, something underneath them, made the man pause. "Say it then," he said, "and say it fast. Winterfen. If a story like this has already caught you by the throat, stay until the very last word, because what happens between these two before the story ends will break you open before it heals you. Drop a comment with the city or country you're watching from tonight, so it's clear how far this pack's story has traveled. The Alpha King of Blackthorn did not move for the length of 3 long breaths. Cale Draven had heard that word exactly once in his life, spoken by no one, because the man who had earned the right to speak it to him had vanished before dawn 12 years ago, without ever giving his name. Cale had said it to himself sometimes, alone, in the dead hours of winter nights when old wounds ached and the wind found every crack in the stone. Winter Fen, a frozen valley where he had been young and proud and careless, where 3 iron fang blades had opened him up and left him to bleed out under a white sky, certain he was going to die alone at 19 years old, with nothing to show for his life. And then a stranger had come out of the trees. A wolf lord with grey in his beard and blood not his own on his hands, who had fought off what remained of his attackers, hauled him onto a horse, and run 2 days through country crawling with enemies to lay him, half dead, at the door of a healer he trusted, and who had vanished before Cale ever woke enough to ask his name. 12 years, and Cale had never once found him. 12 years, and he had stopped believing he ever would. His hand came off the door. "You'd best come in," he said, and something in his chest twisted at the sound of his own voice saying it, because Cale Draven had built 11 years of iron walls, specifically so that no stranger would ever again make him say those words. "But you'll tell me everything, girl, starting with your name." "Ilara," she said, swaying where she stood. "Ilara Vane, daughter of Edric Vane, of Greywater Hold." The name meant nothing to Cale. Not yet. He did not know yet that the quiet, grey-bearded lord who had saved his life on a frozen night had spent 12 years never telling a soul what he'd done, not even his own daughter, until 3 nights ago, bleeding out on his own hall floor, with iron riders breaking down his gates, when he had finally, with his last clear breath, told her the only name in the world that could save her. Cale led her inside. He did not yet know that this exhausted, blood-marked girl standing swaying in his hall was about to unmake 11 years of careful solitude, one whispered word at a time. He did not know that somewhere south, in a black hold called Ironfang, a wolf named Varric Kestrel had just discovered that the girl he meant to claim had slipped through his fingers into the one keep in the northern reach he could not simply burn to the ground. And he did not know, could not have known, standing there with the door shutting behind him and the firelight catching the exhaustion and the terror and the fierce, unbroken pride in Ilara Vane's face, that the wall he was about to build to keep the world out was about to become the very thing that let someone in. The fire in the hearth cracked and settled. Somewhere outside, a wolf howled once, low and long, and did not howl again. "Sit," Cale said, nodding toward the great chair by the fire. "You look like you're about to fall down, and I'd rather you did it sitting than on my floor." Ilara did not sit. Not yet. She stood in the doorway of the Alpha King's hall, with her father's letter still crushed against her chest, and she looked at this cold, scarred, watchful man who had not yet said yes and had not yet said no, and she thought, "Papa, I hope you were right about him, because I have nothing left to run to if you were wrong." Behind her, the great doors of Blackthorn Keep closed with a sound like a held breath finally letting go. A scream tore through the keep's courtyard before the sun had fully risen, and Cale Draven was out of his chair with a blade in his hand before he was fully awake. It was not Ilara. He knew that in the half-second it took him to cross the hall, some animal part of him already tracking her scent in the room she'd been given. Still there, still safe. The scream had come from the watchtower. He took the stairs 3 at a time, boots ringing on stone, and burst out onto the wall to find 2 of his night guards standing over the body of something that had once been a wolf and was now barely anything at all. Throat torn, one ear notched in a way Cale recognized instantly, because he had seen that notch before, years ago, on scouts wearing the same mark. An Ironfang scout, dead at his own wall, cut down before he could finish whatever he'd climbed the ridge to see. "One of our own ridge wolves must have caught him going over, my lord," said the guard, pale under the torchlight. "Fight was already over by the time we reached the wall. Whoever it was didn't stay to be thanked." Cale crouched beside the body and did not need to ask much more than that. He could smell it. Old blood, old grief, and underneath it, unmistakably, the scent of a wolf who had run 3 days on raw fear and had, somewhere in the days before she ever reached his door, been forced to fight for her life at least once. She never told me that, he thought, and something that was not quite anger and not quite admiration moved through his chest. He found her an hour later in the kitchens, sitting very still, with a cup of something warm going cold in her hands, staring at nothing. She looked up when he came in, and whatever she saw on his face made her set the cup down. "You already know," she said. "I know a scout is dead outside my wall with an iron fang mark on his coat, and I know you walked in here 3 days into fleeing something, and I know you've told me exactly 1 word since you arrived." Cale pulled out the bench across from her and sat, which surprised them both because he did not sit across tables from strangers. "So now you're going to tell me the rest. All of it. And you're going to start with why a girl I've never met knows the 1 word in this world that could make me open my own door to a stranger covered in her father's blood." Ilara's jaw tightened, but she didn't look away. "My father's name was Edric Vane," she said. I don't know if it still is. I don't know if he's alive to keep it." Her voice wavered and steadied in the same breath, the way a rope does when it takes weight and holds. 12 years ago, he told me a story. Once, only once, and made me swear never to repeat it unless the day came that our hold needed a debt called in. He said he found a young wolf lord, bleeding out in a valley called Winterfen, 3 blades in him, left for dead by Iron Fang raiders. He said he fought them off, carried the boy 2 days on horseback through enemy land, and left him breathing at a healer's door before dawn, so no one would ever know his name and come looking for thanks he didn't want. Cale sat very still. "He never told me who the boy was," Ilara went on, quieter now. "Not his name, not his pack, nothing. Just that if the day ever came, Greywater couldn't stand on its own, I was to go north, find the Alpha of Blackthorn Keep, and say 1 word. Winterfen. He said that word would open any door in the northern reach that his own name never could." She wrapped both hands around the cold cup. 3 nights ago, Iron Fang riders came over our walls at midnight. My father didn't run. He pushed me out a side door with a knife in his side and told me to run until my legs gave out, and I did. And I don't know if he's alive, and I don't know if that story was even true, and I don't care anymore whether it was, because it was the only door I had left to knock on. The fire popped in the hearth. Cale Draven looked at this girl, filthy, exhausted, grief-hollowed, and utterly unbroken, and understood, the way a man understands a storm is already overhead and not still coming, that his quiet life had ended 3 days ago in a burning hold he had never seen. "I remember Winterfen," he said, low. "I remember I was 19, and certain I was dying, and I remember a stranger's hands, and I remember waking up on a healer's porch, alive, when I had no right to be. I never learned his name. 12 years, and I never learned his name." He looked up at her. "Your father saved my life, Ilara Vane, and I never paid him back, because I never found him to pay." His eyes moved to the letter she still held. "That's his hand on the seal." "I think so. I've never broken it to look." Ilara's fingers tightened around the worn edges. "He sealed it before he pushed me out the door and told me plainly it wasn't mine to read, that it belonged to whoever answered to Winterfen and no one else. I've carried it 3 days and wanted to open it every single mile, and I haven't." Cale did not reach for it. "Then we'll leave it sealed a while longer," he said. "A letter like that deserves better than a tired reading by firelight at the end of the worst 3 days of your life. When your father's fate is settled, one way or the other, that's when it gets opened, not before." Ilara looked at him for a long moment, something in her chest easing slightly at a kindness she hadn't expected from a man who'd nearly shut the door on her the night before, and tucked the letter back inside her coat, close against her heart, where it would stay a while longer yet. "He didn't send me here for payment," Ilara said. "He sent me here because Alpha Verek Kestrel of the Iron Fang Pack decided 3 weeks ago, after my mother's illness left our hold in debt to him, that the cheapest way to settle that debt was to take our lands outright, and take me along with them, as a bride, since his own mate died last winter, and he admires a woman with fire, in his own words, spoken to my face, on my father's threshold, while he smiled the whole time he said it. Her hands had curled into fists on the table. My father refused him. That's why Iron Fang came over our walls. Not for the debt, for the no. Something old and dangerous woke up behind Kale's eyes. He wants you, he said. He wants Greywater's land, and he wants me thrown in as a prize on top of it, and he wants everyone in the Northern Reach to watch him take both, without a single pack daring to stop him. Ilara met his eyes, and for the first time since she'd arrived, there was steel showing under the exhaustion. That's the whole shape of it, Alpha Draven. That's why I ran to a stranger's door and said a dead man's password, instead of lying down and letting him have what he wanted. And now you know, and you can still say no. But you can't say I didn't tell you true. Kale did not say no. Not that morning, and not the morning after, though he told himself for 2 full days that he might. He gave her the guest chamber in the East Tower, the warmest room in the keep, and told himself it was only sensible. A debt holder does not let his creditor's blood freeze to death under his own roof. He set 2 extra guards on the north wall, and told himself it was only caution, because a dead scout at his gate meant Iron Fang already knew where she'd gone. He found himself, on the second evening, standing outside her door, at an hour he had no honest reason to be standing there, listening to make certain she was still breathing on the other side of it, and told himself nothing at all, because there was no sensible story left to tell. On the third morning, Kale found her in the training yard before dawn, sitting on the fence rail above the kennel where his most dangerous prisoner slept. A black wolf, found broken and half feral on the border 3 winters back, dragged in by a patrol that hadn't known what else to do with him, too vicious by then to approach, and too far gone, they judged, to ever let run loose again, that had not let a single blackthorn hand near it in 3 years. "Get down from there," Kale said. "That one's killed 2 of my men." "He hasn't killed anyone," Ilara said, not moving. "He's terrified." There's a difference, and it's the only difference that matters to a wolf who's been caged 3 years, by people who never once asked him why he was fighting. Kale opened his mouth to argue, and found, watching her, that he had nothing to argue with. And it was in that moment, watching a girl 3 days removed from her own burning home, sit calm and steady, above a wolf that had torn grown warriors apart, speaking to it low and gentle, in a voice that had not one trace of fear in it, that Kale Draven understood he had already made his decision, 2 days before he was willing to admit it to himself. He was going to marry her, and God help him, some cold, careful, 11-year buried part of him was almost glad. Riders broke from the tree line at first light, and Blackthorn's watch horn sounded before Kale had even finished pulling on his boots. He was on the wall in under a minute, Ilara a half-step behind him, against his direct order, both of them watching a dozen mounted wolves fan out along the ridge a mile north. Not attacking, not yet, just sitting their horses in a long, deliberate line, close enough to be seen, far enough to claim they'd done nothing at all. At the center of them, a black banner snapped in the wind, and on it, stitched in iron-gray thread, a single closed fist gripping a fang. "Iron Fang," Ilara breathed. "That's not an attack, that's a message." "That's him counting my walls," Kale said grimly, "and counting how many men I've got standing on them." He turned from the wall, jaw set. He's not fool enough to storm Blackthorn Keep outright. Not yet. But he wants us to know he's found you, and he wants us to know he's close enough to reach out and take you whenever he decides the time is right. "Then we don't give him a whenever," Ilara said. "You told me 2 nights ago you believed my father's story. You told me you owed him a debt you never got to pay. There's only one way left in this world to pay it, Alpha Draven, and you and I both know what it is, and we've both been dancing around saying it out loud for 3 days like a pair of fools." Kale turned to look at her fully then, mist curling around them both on the cold stone wall, riders watching from the ridge below, like patient wolves circling a wounded deer. "You understand what marrying me means," he said. "Under the old pact, a claimed mate of a ruling alpha, a wife bound by pack law before witnesses, cannot be taken by another alpha, not by right, not by debt, not by force, without breaking the oldest law our kind has. Every pack from here to the Salt Coast answers to that law, even Varek Kestrel. It won't stop him from hating it, but it will stop him from doing anything about it, without making every pack in the Northern Reach his enemy at once." His voice roughened. "But I need you to hear the rest of it plain, Ilara, because I won't have you agreeing to something you don't understand whole. I was mated once before. Years ago. I lost her and the pup she carried. In a raid I couldn't stop in time, and I built 11 years of walls around myself so I'd never again have anything a raider could take from me, by taking someone I loved. If I do this, it's to be your wall, nothing more. I won't ask for what a mate bond usually asks for. I won't pretend at feelings I buried a long time ago and have no intention of digging back up. You'll have your own chamber, your own say in this keep, my name to stand behind and my sword to stand in front of. But it's a cold bargain I'm offering you, not a warm one. I need you to say yes to that, not to some story you've told yourself about what a marriage is supposed to be." Ilara held his eyes a long moment, and something in her chest ached at the rawness under his flat, careful words. She recognized it, she realized, because she'd been carrying the same kind of ache herself for 3 days and calling it something else. "I didn't come here for warm, Alpha Draven," she said. "I came here for a wall. I'll take it cold and call it a fair trade." They were married before the sun reached its highest point, in the keep's old stone chapel, before Kale's household and a dozen wary pack elders who had gathered fast on word alone. There was no time for banns, no time for a proper wedding feast, no time for anything but the words that mattered under wolf law. The binding oath, spoken before witnesses, sealed not with a ring, but with the oldest mark their kind knew, a shallow cut across each palm, pressed together, blood mixing while the words were said, so that any wolf in the Northern Reach who scented Ilara Vane from that morning forward would know, without being told, exactly whose mate she now was. Kale did not look at her while the elder spoke the binding words. He kept his eyes fixed on the carved stone lintel above the chapel door, and Ilara noticed, and said nothing, though something in her chest twisted at it anyway. Among the witnesses stood a broad-shouldered warrior, with kind, tired eyes and a scar through one eyebrow. Bran Ashwood, Kale's second-in-command and sworn shield brother since boyhood. He watched the binding with an expression none of the others noticed, because none of the others were looking for it. Not joy, not suspicion, but something closer to dread, quickly hidden. He was the first to step forward afterward and clasp Kale's forearm in the warrior's grip, the first to bow his head to Ilara and call her Luna, Lady of the Pack, in a voice that did not waver, even though his hands, Ilara noticed, were not quite steady. She filed the thought away and did not yet understand why it mattered. That night, riding back along the wall walk before sleep, Kale found her standing where they'd stood that morning, looking north to where the Ironfang riders had long since ridden off. "You said I do to the ceiling," Ilara said, not turning around. "The whole time. I had a very good view of the side of your face, husband, and you never once looked at me." "I was concentrating," Kale said, "on not breaking a vow I'd only just made. My mother would have had a great deal to say about a groom who won't look his bride in the eye." "Your mother isn't here." The words left his mouth before he could stop them, and he heard, half a breath later, exactly how they landed. Heard the small, sharp intake of Ilara's breath, heard the old grief in it that he'd just carelessly struck without meaning to. "That was small of me," he said at once, low. "I'm sorry. You buried your father 3 days ago, maybe, and I don't even know that for certain yet, and I threw your mother at you to win an argument I wasn't even losing. That wasn't fair of me." Ilara was quiet a moment, studying him in the moonlight, with something new moving behind her eyes. "You always do that," she said finally. Take a hard thing back the second it's out. Most men would let it sit and go to rot rather than admit the wrong. You never do. My mate used to say the same thing, Cale said, and something in his chest caught at how close her name came to following that sentence out of him. A name he hadn't let past his own teeth in 11 years. Not once, not even alone. He swallowed it back down. She said I'd rather bleed a little now than carry the wound around unspoken for a year. He looked out over the dark tree line. I lost that habit for a long time after I lost her. Guess it's coming back. Thank you, Elara said quietly. For what? For not lying to me about what this is. She wrapped her arms around herself against the cold. You didn't have to be honest about the wall being cold. Most men would have dressed it up prettier to get me to stop asking questions. You didn't. That's worth more to me than you probably know. Cale looked at her, filthy no longer, dressed now in a borrowed gown too large in the shoulders, hair still smelling faintly of smoke beneath the lavender the kitchen maids had washed it with, standing on his wall with a warrior's spine and a girl's grief both at once, and felt something shift in his chest that he did not yet have a name for and was not yet ready to look at directly. Don't thank me yet, he said instead, turning back toward the stairs. You haven't seen what this debt is going to cost either of us yet, Elara. I have a feeling Varric Kestrel is only just getting started. He was right. But neither of them yet knew exactly how right or how soon the reckoning would come, or that the man circling their walls like patient smoke was already, at that very hour, sending riders south to Ironfang Hold, with orders that would set the rest of this story into motion. The black wolf came at the kennel bars so fast that 2 guards fell backward off the rail, and Elara did not so much as flinch. She had been coming to the kennel every dawn for a week now, since the morning she'd first sat above it, and the pack had stopped trying to talk her out of it after the 3rd day, because Elara Vane, they had all quickly learned, was not a woman who could be talked out of anything once she'd decided it mattered. What none of them yet understood, not the guards, not the kitchen maids, not even Cale, watching now from the yard gate with his arms crossed and his jaw tight with worry he refused to name, was that Elara wasn't simply stubborn. She could feel things about wolves that other people couldn't. It had always been this way, since she was small. A strange, quiet gift her mother once called hearing the truth under the fur, and had made her promise never to speak of outside their own walls, because a gift like that drew eyes that were not always kind. Elara had never told anyone the full truth of what it was, that when she looked at a wolf, especially a wolf in pain, she could feel, not hear, not see, feel, the shape of what had wounded it, fear from cruelty, rage from betrayal, grief from loss. And sometimes, when a wound ran deep enough, a name clung to the memory of it the way a burr clings to fur, not spoken, never spoken, but there all the same for a moonblood hand to find. It sat in her chest like a second heartbeat, and it had never once been wrong. The black wolf in Blackthorn's kennel was not vicious. He was drowning. His name is Torvin, she said quietly, not moving from the rail even as the wolf slammed against the bars again, froth at his jaws, eyes wild. He was a scout. Ironfang caught him 3 winters back running a border patrol alone, and they didn't kill him. They broke him first, to make him talk, and when he wouldn't, they let him go half mad and let your own men find him and call him a beast instead of a victim. Her voice was very steady. Nobody's ever once asked him what happened to him. They've only ever asked what he can do to them. Cale had gone very still at the gate. How could you possibly know that? Because I can feel it, Elara said simply, and turned to look at him, and decided, in that moment, that a man who had married her honestly deserved at least this much truth in return. It's a gift my mother's bloodline carries. We call it moonblood when we speak of it at all, which is almost never, because it frightens people who don't have it, and it draws the attention of people who want to use it. I can feel the true shape of a wound in any wolf, what caused it, whether a scar is old or still bleeding underneath. My mother had it, her mother before her. I've never told a soul outside Greywater, not even my father's own men. She held his eyes. I'm telling you because you're my husband now, and because I think you, of every man I've met, might actually understand what it means to carry a wound nobody else can see." Cale crossed the yard slowly and came to stand beside her at the rail, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him even in the cold morning air. "Freya used to say, I had a wound like that," he said quietly. "Said I wore it like armor instead of letting anyone dress it." Guess she wasn't wrong. He looked at the wolf, pacing now, calmer, some of the wildness gone out of his eyes, since Alara had started speaking. "You really think you can reach him? I think somebody should have tried 3 years ago." Alara climbed down from the rail, slow, deliberate, keeping herself always in the wolf's good sightline, the way her father had taught her since childhood. "Never surprise a wounded thing, Alara, let it choose you." She crouched at a careful distance and held out one open palm, low, unthreatening, and simply waited. The whole yard held its breath. Even the guards who'd fallen backward off the rail stayed frozen where they'd landed. For a long moment, nothing moved but the wind. Then, slowly, the black wolf's ears came forward. His pacing slowed. And when he finally crossed the last few feet of packed dirt between them and lowered his great scarred head into Alara's open hand, Cale Draven felt something crack open in his chest that had been sealed shut for 11 years. Watching his new, unwanted, unexpected wife gentle the one creature in his entire keep that every trained warrior he owned had given up on. "Well," Cale said, when he trusted his voice again, "I'll be damned." "Probably," Alara agreed, not looking away from the wolf, the first real smile Cale had seen on her since she'd arrived. Small, private, entirely unguarded, aimed at Torvin, and not at him, though it did something to Cale's chest regardless. "But not today. Today you've got a scout back, if you want him. A good one, once he's healed proper, and I've earned my breakfast." That evening, at supper, Alara did something that had nothing to do with wolves at all, though it took Cale a while to notice she was doing it on purpose. She asked him about his father. It began small, sideways, the way most things with Alara seemed to begin. A passing question about who had built the East Tower, since the stonework there was older and finer than the rest of the keep. And before Cale quite understood what was happening, he was telling her about his father, a hard, silent alpha who had never once said the words, "I love you" aloud, in Cale's whole childhood, but had built this keep stone by stone with his own hands, and believed, in his own quiet way, that a well-built wall said it better than words ever could. "You're doing it on purpose," Cale said finally, catching himself mid-story and setting down his cup. "Getting me to talk. You do it exactly the way you gentled that wolf. Sit still. Wait. Let me come to your hand." "It's the same skill," Alara said, unbothered. "You just have to actually want to listen when a wounded thing finally decides to speak. Most people don't. They only want to know if it's safe." "I told you this was a cold bargain," Cale said, though there was less iron in it than there had been the day he'd said it first. "You did, and you can keep meaning it." Alara met his eyes across the lamplight, steady, unafraid. "I'm not trying to make you love me, Cale Draven. I told you I wasn't, and I don't say things that large unless I mean them. But you're my husband, and there's a man circling this keep who means us both harm, and when the hard day comes, I would rather be standing beside someone I actually know than a name I only share a bloody handprint with. That's not love. That's just not being strangers when it counts. You can allow me that much and still keep every last one of your rules." Cale sat with that a long time, the fire cracking low in the hearth, and found, to his own quiet astonishment, that he did not want to argue with her. "My mate's name was Freya," he said at last, and it came out rough, rusted from years of disuse. "Raiders struck our border village 11 years back, in the dead of night. She was close to her time with our pup, too close to run far, and I could not reach her before the fire did. I lost them both before dawn." He was looking at the fire, not at Alara, because he could not yet say this and look at her both at once. "I was young. I decided that night I was done. Not done living. I didn't have the stomach for that. and there's no honor in it besides, but done wanting. I worked out fast that everything that had ever hurt me was a thing I'd loved first. So I stopped loving things. Made myself into a man with nothing left to lose. Because a man with nothing to lose can't be hurt twice the same way. He finally looked at her. That's why I live like I do, Ilara. That's why this keep's been quiet as a tomb for 11 years. It's not that I'm cold clean through. It's that I built myself cold on purpose, and I've gotten frighteningly good at it. Ilara was quiet a moment, and when she spoke, her voice was gentle in a way it had not been before. And then a girl, covered in her father's blood, knocked on your cold, quiet door, she said, and said one word, and here you sit, telling me about your father's stonework and your mate's name in the same evening you swore you'd never do either again. Cale's mouth did something that was not quite a smile, and was not quite its opposite. 11 years of having nothing to lose, he said slowly, just ended, and I did that to myself. I walked right into it with my eyes wide open. He shook his head. Worst part is, Ilara Vane, I'm not entirely certain yet that I'm sorry. Neither of them noticed, in that firelit hour, the shape standing just beyond the hall door. Bran Ashwood, who had come to report the night watch and had stopped instead in the shadow of the corridor, listening to his alpha speak a dead woman's name aloud for the first time in a decade, and feeling something twist sick and guilty in his own chest, because Bran alone in that whole keep knew something neither Cale nor Ilara yet did. He knew exactly why Varric Kestrel had not yet attacked, and he knew, with a dread that kept him awake long past moonrise, that the reason was standing in that firelit hall, not knowing she was already the second thing Varric Kestrel had decided to take from Cale Draven. The scream that split the night 2 weeks later was not a wolf's scream. It was a man's, and it was Bran Ashwood's, and it came from the north watchtower, where he'd caught a shadow trying to slip over the wall in the dead hours before dawn. Cale reached the tower with his blade already drawn to find Bran standing over a bound, bleeding Ironfang scout, breathing hard, his fists still raw from the fight it had taken to bring the man down alive instead of dead. Ilara arrived a heartbeat later, wrapped in a cloak thrown on over her nightclothes, and stopped cold at the sight of the prisoner's coat, the same closed fist and fang mark she'd fled 3 weeks ago. He was going for the east wall, Bran said, breathing hard, not attacking, watching, counting torches, most like. He hauled the man up by the collar. Talk, and maybe you walk out of this keep instead of being carried. The scout, young and terrified and clearly not made for this kind of work, talked fast. Alpha Kestrel knows she's here, he said, eyes darting to Ilara. Has known for 2 weeks. He's not moved on the keep because of the binding, the blood mark. He can't take a claimed mate without breaking the old pact in front of every pack from here to the Salt Coast, and even Alpha Kestrel isn't fool enough to hand every rival Alpha in the Reach a reason to unite against him. Not yet. He swallowed. But he's not backing down either. He's building a claim. A different kind. What kind? Cale said, low and dangerous. A debt oath, the scout said. He says Lord Edric Vane bound his daughter to Alpha Kestrel in a blood oath years back, in exchange for Ironfang protection during a bad winter. Says the oath's still standing under wolf law, older than this marriage, and that makes this whole binding void. He looked genuinely frightened now, and not of Cale. He's sending word to the Reach Council. He means to make it a matter for the Moot to decide, not a war he starts himself. If the council rules the oath stands, they'll have to unbind you both by their own law, my lady, no matter what Alpha Draven wants. The tower went dead silent. That's a lie, Ilara said, and her voice, when it came, was not loud, but it cracked like a whip across the stone. My father would never have bound me to that man. I was a child during that winter. I remember it. There was no oath, no ceremony, nothing. I would have known. I would have felt it. Her hands had curled into fists at her sides, the old moonblood instinct rising sharp and certain in her chest. He's inventing it. The same way he tried to invent a debt when he came for our land. He's counting on nobody being alive who can say otherwise. Except you, Kale said grimly. You're alive, and you just said, in front of a witness, that no such oath exists. My word against his, in front of a council that's half afraid of him and half in his pocket. Elara shook her head. That's not enough, Kale. We both know it's not enough. A council doesn't overturn the word of the strongest alpha in the Reach, on the say-so of one girl with no proof and a father who might already be dead. Bran had gone very quiet during this exchange, and something in his stillness caught Elara's attention, the way a held breath catches a room's. But before she could name what it was, Kale was already moving, already thinking 3 steps ahead, the cold, careful strategist under the grief finally coming forward. Then we get proof, he said. A man who invents a debt out of thin air does it because he's done it before and gotten away with it. Men like Varric Kestrel don't stop at one lie. They build empires on them. He turned to the trembling scout. You said he's building a claim to bring before the moot. That means he's confident. Overconfident men leave trails. Where does he keep his oath records? His true accounts, not the ones he shows the council. The scout hesitated, and Bran, quiet, watchful Bran, who had said almost nothing this whole encounter, spoke up before Kale could press harder. I might know someone who can answer that better than a border scout would, Bran said, and something in his voice was strange, tight, careful in a way Kale had never heard from his oldest friend. There's a healer in Iron Fang Hold. Old woman named Meryn. Tends the wounded there, has for years. She's not loyal to Kestrel. Nobody who's served that man for 2 decades stays loyal. Not truly. If anyone inside those walls knows where he keeps his real records, it's her. He looked away as he said it, and Elara, watching closely, noted the way his jaw tightened, the way his eyes wouldn't quite hold Kale's. I've heard things. Traders talk. Kale studied his old friend a moment too long, some instinct prickling at the back of his neck that he did not yet have the full shape of. But there was a war to prepare for and a lie to unravel, and he let it go, because Bran Ashwood had stood at his shoulder since they were boys learning to shift together in the training yard, and Kale would sooner have doubted his own hands than doubt Bran. He did not yet know how much that trust was about to cost them both. Later that night, alone on the wall walk, Elara found Kale standing where he always stood when the weight of the keep pressed too heavy on him, looking north, toward the dark line of trees beyond which Iron Fang's black banners waited. You went quiet in there, she said, coming to stand beside him. When Bran mentioned the healer, something about it didn't sit right with you. I've known Bran Ashwood since we were pups fighting over the same scrap of meat, Kale said slowly. He doesn't usually know things about Iron Fang's household staff, doesn't usually volunteer information that fast either. He's careful, always has been. He shook his head. It's probably nothing. Traders do talk. A man picks things up. But, Elara said, hearing the word he hadn't spoken. But I've learned not to ignore the small wrong notes, Kale admitted. Freya used to say, I had good ears for a lie, and terrible manners about mentioning it. I'll keep watching, quietly. For now, we need what he's offered us far more than I need to be right about a feeling. Elara was quiet a moment, looking out at the same dark tree line, and something in her chest, the same instinct that let her feel the true shape of a wolf's old wounds, stirred uneasily, though she could not yet say why. My mother used to tell me something, she said finally. She said a mate bond, a true one, isn't just about warmth and comfort. She said it's a kind of knowing. You feel a pull toward the person, yes, but you also feel it when something's wrong near them, wrong in the pack, wrong in the world around you both. She said it nearly killed her once, feeling a betrayal coming and not being believed in time. Her voice dropped. I've been afraid of that pull since the day I understood what it meant. My mother was claimed young, by a man who swore he loved her, and used that claim instead to control her, and it very nearly broke her before my father found her and freed her from it properly. I grew up terrified of ever being claimed by anyone, Kale. Terrified of what a bond like that can be turned into in the wrong hands. She looked at him then, honest in the moonlight, in a way she hadn't quite let herself be before. I don't feel that when I stand near you. I want you to know that. Whatever this bargain between us is, it doesn't feel like a cage. It feels like... She stopped, unable to find the word, and Cale, watching her search for it, felt his own chest ache with a feeling he had spent 11 years refusing to name. Like a wall that's learned to be a door, he offered quietly. Elara looked up at him, startled, and something passed between them in the cold night air that neither of them was yet brave enough to call by its true name. Neither of them saw Bran Ashwood standing in the shadow of the stairwell below, listening, his hand pressed flat and shaking against the stone, because Bran alone knew that the trader's talk he'd offered so smoothly had come, in truth, from a raven that had found his window 3 nights before, carrying a message in Varric Kestrel's own hand. Your sister still breathes, Ashwood. She will keep breathing exactly as long as you keep reporting what happens inside Blackthorn's walls. Fail me, and you may collect what's left of her yourself. Bran closed his eyes against the guilt climbing up his throat, and went to write his next report, hating himself with every word. The horn sounded twice at midday, which meant not attack, but arrival, and every soul in Blackthorn Keep was on the wall before the second note had finished ringing. Varric Kestrel rode up the North Road alone at the front of a dozen riders, unarmored, dressed in a fine grey cloak, sitting his horse like a man who had never once in his life ridden toward anything that could tell him no. He was older than Elara remembered fully seeing, silver at his temples, a face gone comfortable and pleasant, with the particular ease of a man who has spent decades never once being refused. He stopped his horse at the base of the wall, well within earshot, and looked up with an expression of mild, wounded reasonableness that made Elara's stomach turn. Alpha Draven, Varric called up, pleasant as a man greeting an old friend. I do hope I haven't come at a poor time. I've ridden a long way to speak with you about a matter of law between our 2 houses. I trust we can conduct our business as reasonable men. Cale came to the wall's edge, Elara, a deliberate half-step behind him, close enough to hear everything, far enough to stay technically out of sight below the parapet, exactly as they'd planned 2 nights before. Say your piece, Kestrel, Cale called down. You've got until my patience runs out, and it's shorter than you'd like. Very well. Directness suits a soldier. Varric folded his gloved hands over his saddle horn. Your new bride's father, Lord Edric Vane, bound his daughter to me in a debt oath during the hard winter 13 years past, in exchange for Ironfang grain and protection that kept Greywater Hold from starving. That oath was never dissolved. Under the old pact, an unbroken oath outranks a newer binding, however sincerely made. I've sent word to the Reach Council already, requesting the moot convene to settle the matter properly, as law demands. His voice was warm, reasonable, terrible. I don't wish for war between our packs, Alpha Draven. I only wish for what the law already says is mine. Return her before the moot convenes, and I'll consider Greywater's remaining debts forgiven in full, and no pack in this reach need ever know it came to more than a quiet, lawful arrangement between gentlemen. There is no oath, Elara said, stepping into full view before Cale could stop her, and though her voice shook faintly with fury, it did not waver in its certainty. I was 7 years old that winter, Alpha Kestrel. I remember every visitor who crossed our threshold. There was no binding, no ceremony, nothing. You are inventing a debt from thin air, the same way you invented one 3 weeks ago to justify burning my home to the ground. Something flickered across Varric's pleasant face. Quick, gone almost before it showed, but Elara had spent 3 weeks learning to read the true shape of wounds and lies both, and she saw it plainly. Not the flicker of an honest man wrongly accused, but the flicker of a man whose lie had just been struck a glancing blow. A child does not always understand the arrangements her father makes for her protection, Varric said smoothly, recovering. I have the oath record at Ironfang Hold, sealed and witnessed, should the council require it. Then bring it to the moot, Cale said flatly. Let them see it. Let every alpha in the Reach see your seal, and your witnesses, and judge for themselves whether a 10-year-old girl's memory or a grown man's convenient paperwork tells the truer story. Varek's jaw tightened. Just slightly. Just enough. The records are sensitive. I don't carry them to another Alpha's gate to be examined like a merchant's ledger. Convenient, Kale said, that the one proof of your claim never seems to leave your own walls. The two men held each other's eyes across the distance for a long, dangerous moment, and Alara, watching, understood with sudden clarity exactly what Kale had understood the moment the words left Varek's mouth. He did not have proof. He had never had proof. He had a lie built to survive exactly as long as no one dared demand to see behind it, and he had just, without meaning to, told them precisely where that lie's only weakness lived. Varek's pleasant mask slipped fully, for just one instant, into something colder. Keep this remote, he said, conversational, almost gentle. This far from any other pack's aid is a lonely, dangerous sort of place, Alpha Draven. Dry seasons make for careless fires. Wells go bad. Livestock wander and never come home. Terrible things happen in places too far off for anyone to hear a call for help. He gathered his reins. I'd hate for anything terrible to happen here before the moot has its say. A wise Alpha finds the safe road and takes it, for his own sake, and for hers. Ride safely back down that hill, Kestrel, Kale said, low and even. It's a long way to fall. Varek laughed, short and genuinely amused, as though Kale had told a fine joke, and wheeled his horse without another word, his riders falling in behind him at the same unhurried, insulting pace they'd arrived with. Kale and Alara watched them go until they were nothing but distant shapes on the road, and only then did Kale let his shoulders come down from where they'd been locked near his ears. He threatened the wells, Alara said quietly, once the riders were well out of sight. The same way he threatened grey water. Fire. Water. That's not a new threat, Kale. That's a pattern. He's done this before, hasn't he? More than once. I think, Kale said slowly, we need to find out exactly how many times. That evening, Kale called Bran to his study, a summons that should have been ordinary and was not, because Bran arrived pale and too careful in his movements, and Kale, watching his oldest friend cross the room, felt that same small wrong note sound again in the back of his mind, louder this time. You offered up that healer's name too easily, Kale said, without preamble, once the door was shut. Merrin, in Iron Fang Hold. I've turned it over 3 days now, Bran, and I keep landing on the same question. How does a Blackthorn warrior, who's never once set foot past our southern border, know the name and loyalties of a serving woman inside Varek Kestrel's own household? Bran's face did something complicated. Guilt and fear, and old, exhausted love for the man across from him, all fighting for space at once. Kale, he said, and his voice cracked on the single syllable in a way Kale had not heard from him since they were boys. Before this goes any further, before you trust anything else I tell you, there's something you need to know. Something I should have told you 3 weeks ago, the night that Scout died at our wall. He sat down heavily, as though his legs had simply stopped being willing to hold him up. My sister Ellen. You remember she went south 2 years back, to trade with a weaving guild near the Ashen Vale border. I remember, Kale said, gone very still. She never reached the guild, Bran said, and his voice broke entirely now. Kestrel's men took her on the road. He's held her since. Alive, he swears, though I haven't laid eyes on proof of it in 8 months. And every month, a raven comes to my window, telling me what I'm to report back if I want her to stay that way. He would not look up. I've been feeding him what I could that seemed harmless. Guard rotations. How many riders we keep on the north wall. Small things, I told myself, things that wouldn't cost anyone their life. His hands were shaking now, openly. I didn't tell him about the binding until it had already happened, Kale. I swear that to you on Freya's memory. But I have been his eyes inside these walls for 2 years, and I have hated myself every single day of it. And I am telling you now, because I would rather you kill me yourself for the betrayal than let Elara walk into more danger, not knowing there's a crack in our own walls that I put there." The study went utterly silent. Cale stood very still for a long moment, old friendship and fresh fury warring visibly across his face. And when he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough, with more grief than rage. "How long have you been carrying this alone?" "2 years," Bran whispered. "2 years," Cale repeated, and something in his chest cracked at the thought of his sworn brother suffering that weight in silence for so long, even through the anger. "You should have come to me the day it happened, Bran. We would have found her. We would have found another way." "I know that now," Bran said. "I was too afraid to believe it then. Fear does that. It convinces you the only safe road is the one that costs you the least, all at once, even when it costs everyone else more, a little at a time, until the debt's too large to ever repay." His eyes came up, wet and desperate. "Let me fix it, Cale. Whatever it costs me. Let me be the crack that lets us in, instead of him, for once. I know that hold. I know every guard rotation, every blind hour, because he's made me learn them to report on ours. Use that. Use me. Just help me get my sister out before this is over, and I swear on every oath I've ever sworn to you, I will spend the rest of my life earning back the trust I broke tonight." Cale looked at his oldest friend a long, long moment. Betrayal and love sitting side by side in his chest, in a way that felt, for the first time in years, almost exactly like being alive. "All right," he said finally. "But Bran, if you lie to me again, even once, even to spare my feelings, we're done. Do you understand me? I need to know every single thing you know, starting now, no matter how small, no matter how much you think it might not matter." "Everything," Bran promised, and for the first time in 2 years, he meant it completely. Outside the study door, unseen by either of them, Elara had stopped in the corridor, one hand pressed to the stone, having heard enough to understand that the crack in their wall had just, painfully, become their best hope of finding the door in. Arrows came out of the tree line before the trading party had gone half a mile, and Roran Ash was already moving before the first shout went up. He'd learned 4 years ago, the hard way, never to trust a quiet road near the Ashen Vale border, and he'd learned it standing over the ashes of a barn with his family's flock burned alive inside it. So when the first arrow buried itself in a crate on the wagon beside him, he didn't freeze. He grabbed the nearest trader by the collar and hauled him down behind the wheel, roaring for the others to do the same. And it was only when he came up with a blade in his hand, ready to fight off whatever was coming, that he realized the riders weren't attacking his wagon at all. They were fleeing something behind them, and the arrows had gone wide because they weren't aimed at him. They were aimed at the 2 riders and single wagon barreling down the same road from the north. Cale Draven, Elara Vane, and Bran Ashwood, bloodied but upright, driving a wagon they'd nearly lost twice already to an Iron Fang patrol that had picked up their trail 3 miles back. Roran didn't know any of that yet. He only knew 3 riders needed cover, and cover was the one thing a border way station was built to give. "This way," he shouted, and led them hard into the trees, off the road, along a route only someone who'd spent 4 years learning every hiding place on this stretch of border would have known existed, until the sound of pursuit faded behind them and the low stone walls of Bonewatch way station rose up out of the fog. It was only once they were inside, doors barred, horses hidden in the stable behind false walls Roran had built for exactly this purpose, that he got his first real look at the woman he'd just saved, and stopped dead in the doorway. "I know you," he said slowly. You're Edric Vane's girl. Elara. You used to sit on the training fence at Greywater, and watch your father work the young wolves. You were just a child." His voice cracked, old grief surfacing fast and raw. "I heard Greywater fell. I'm sorry for it. Your father was one of the only decent alphas left in this whole cursed reach." "You knew my father," Elara said, something hopeful and hungry rising in her voice. Everyone in Three Valleys knew Edric Vane. Roran's jaw tightened, old pain moving behind his eyes. My name is Roran Ash. I was born to the Fenwood Pack, over the ridge from Greywater. 4 years ago, Alpha Varric Kestrel decided our lands sat on the best river water in the Vale, and he did to us exactly what I hear he's trying to do to you now. Invented a debt, took it to a judge in his own pocket, and when my father stood up in that hall and called him a liar to his face in front of witnesses, do you know what happened 2 weeks later? Ilara already knew, with a sick certainty, before he said it. Our barn burned, Roran said, voice flat with old grief. Whole flock inside it. His men called it a dry season accident. My mother never recovered from the grief of it, past that winter. His hands, Cale noticed now, were scarred and rope-worn, a man's hands who had spent 4 years doing hard labor at a border post rather than leave the valley he'd lost. I stayed close because I couldn't make myself leave, told myself I was watching for a chance to make it right. 4 years, and I never found one. His eyes moved to Ilara, sharp now, alert. Until tonight, it looks like. Why are you here? Lady Draven, what's chasing you? Ilara told him everything. The false debt, the fabricated oath, Varric's threat to the council, the pattern of lies that had cost Roran his family, and now threatened to cost her and Cale everything they'd built. And when she finished, Roran Ash sat back against the cold stone wall and let out a long, shaking breath, the breath, it seemed, of 4 years finally finding somewhere to go. My mother kept a book, he said quietly. Did you know that? Every debt, every trade, every deal my father ever made, written down in her own hand, because she never trusted a man in that valley to remember a bargain honestly, Kestrel least of all. I told the truth to the judge, that my father's supposed debt mark on Kestrel's note wasn't his hand at all, that my father never signed papers without my mother present to witness them, but I had no proof, because she'd hidden the book too well, too scared to bring it forward with Kestrel's men standing at the back of that hall. By the time I found it, the land was already gone. His hands closed into fists. I've kept that book 4 years, Lady Draven, a weapon with no target, waiting, I think, though I never let myself admit it, for someone to finally need it. We need it, Cale said, stepping forward. But Roran, a 4-year-old ledger, proves he's lied before. It doesn't prove the lie he's telling now, about the oath, or hand us anything the Reach Council would call binding proof over an active claim. We need his own current records. His true accounts, the real numbers, set against whatever he's shown the council. Then you need someone inside, Roran said grimly. And Ironfang Hold doesn't let strangers past the gate. I know someone inside, Bran said quietly, speaking for the first time since they'd arrived, still favoring the arm an arrow had grazed on the road. Merrin, the healer. I've been carrying messages to her for 2 years, without meaning to build a friendship. Kestrel used her too, to relay instructions when he didn't want a raven trail. She hates him, Roran. I've heard it in every word she's ever sent back. If anyone inside those walls will help us, it's her. Roran studied Bran a long moment. A Blackthorn warrior confessing, in the same breath, both a betrayal and an offering. And something in the honesty of it seemed to settle some old, wary judgment in his chest. There's a night every fortnight, Roran said slowly, when Kestrel rides to the Reach capital himself, to sit at council with the other border lords and play at being the reasonable alpha everyone half fears and half believes. He takes his best guards with him. House is thin that night, just the healer, a scullery girl, and a gate guard who drinks himself half-blind by moonrise because he thinks no one's watching close enough on the one night the master's away. He looked between the 3 of them. Next such night is 4 days from now. If your healer will open a door, and if Ashwood here truly knows those halls well enough to get someone through them unseen, that's your window. It won't come again for 2 more weeks, and I don't think any of us believes you have 2 more weeks left to spare. We don't, Ilara said. The moot could convene any day now. Once the council rules, even wrongly, Cale would need to break the ruling outright to keep me, and that means open war with every pack in the Reach watching. We need the proof in hand before that ruling ever comes down, not after." Kale looked at his wife, steady, fierce, already 3 steps into a plan more dangerous than any of them wanted to say aloud, and felt the old, careful, protective instinct in him war hard against the newer thing that had grown in his chest since a girl walked into his hall, covered in her father's blood, and said one impossible word. "You're not going in alone," he said. "Whatever happens Thursday night, whatever door Marin opens, I'm within reach of it the whole time. Roran, Bran, I need eyes on every approach, every guard, every hour that gate guard's likely to be too drunk to notice a shadow. We plan this the way a debt this large deserves to be paid. Careful, complete, and we don't get a second chance to get it right." "Together then," Roran said, and put out one scarred hand. "Together," said Bran, laying his own hand atop it, the first real steadiness in his voice in 2 years. Elara looked at the 3 men gathered in that small stone way station, an exiled lord, a guilt-carrying warrior seeking redemption, and an alpha king who had spent 11 years building walls specifically so he'd never again have anything worth risking this much for, and laid her own hand over theirs. "Together," she said, and for the first time since Greywater burned, she let herself believe, fully, that they might actually win. 4 days. That was all the time left before Thursday night, before the gate at Ironfang Hold, before everything either of them had left to lose would be laid on a single dark table at once. Neither Kale nor Elara said aloud. That night, riding back toward Blackthorn under a thin sliver of moon, the thing they'd both begun, quietly, separately, to feel growing between them in the spaces where fear should have lived alone. But it was there all the same, steady as a held hand in the dark, and it would not let either of them look away from it much longer. The gate guard was already half blind with wine by the time Elara slipped through the kitchen door at Ironfang Hold, exactly as Merrin had promised. The old healer stood waiting just inside, lamp turned low, her lined face a map of 20 years' worth of swallowed anger finally being spent all at once. "You've got until the second bell," she whispered, gripping Elara's wrist hard. "The scullery girl's asleep. I saw to that myself. Nothing that'll harm her, just a deep, early rest. My master rides home by the second bell on council nights, without fail. If you're not out of that study before it rings, girl, no door I can open will save either of us." "I understand," Elara whispered back. "Show me." The study was exactly as Marin had described it 100 times over 4 whispered conversations relayed through Bran's careful hands. A grand, cold room lined with trophies of conquered borders, and along the far wall, beside the cold hearth, a paneled section that looked, to any untrained eye, like nothing more than decorative stonework. "He had a man brought from the capital to build it," Marin whispered, running her fingers along a seam invisible to Elara's eye. "I heard, later, that man had an accident on his ride home." Her mouth twisted, bitter. "I've dusted this panel 1,000 times, girl. Stood not 2 feet from it every week for 20 years, knowing what it hid, never once having the courage or the reason to open it." Her hands, trembling now, found the hidden catch. "Give me the reason. I've waited 20 years for someone to finally give me the reason." The panel swung open on silent, well-oiled hinges, and there, in the dark, sat 2 heavy, leather-bound books. Elara's breath caught. One book was black, its cover embossed with Ironfang's Fist and Fang seal. The official record, she knew instantly, the one Kestrel would show any council that dared to ask. The other was plain, unmarked, its pages worn soft with handling. She opened it with shaking hands under the lamp's low light, and understood, in the space of one held breath, exactly what she was looking at. Names. Dozens of them. Fenwood, Greywater. A dozen smaller holds she'd never even heard named before tonight. Beside each name, 2 figures. The true debt, and beside it, the inflated sum Kestrel had actually collected in its place. The difference pocketed, land seized, families broken. Every single theft recorded in his own careful, damning hand. Because under the old dark law that bound every forced oath, a broken debt left unrecorded curses its breaker from the inside out. And Varric Kestrel, whatever else he was, had never once been willing to risk that curse to save himself the trouble of writing down the truth. And there, near the middle, in ink barely a season old, Vane, Ilara, claimed debt 1,400. True debt, none. Oath fabricated for leverage. Ref. Vane, Edric, held at Ironfang Cell 3, as insurance against council inquiry. Ilara's whole body went cold. Held at Ironfang, not dead, not lost to the fire that took Greywater's gates, alive. Her father was alive, somewhere in this very hold, and Varric Kestrel had been keeping him as a living hostage against exactly this moment, in case anyone ever came looking hard enough to threaten his lie. She had no time to feel the full weight of it. Far below, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of horses in the courtyard, far too early for the second bell. "He's back," Merrin breathed, going white. "Something's wrong. He never returns before the second bell." Outside, crouched in the black shadow of the garden wall, Cale Draven heard the same sound and felt his whole body turn to ice. He didn't wait to think it through. He stepped out from the shadows into the open drive, directly into the path of 6 riders coming home fast under torchlight, and raised his voice loud enough to carry across the whole dark courtyard, buying with his own exposed body the only thing left to buy: time. "That's far enough, Kestrel." The riders hauled up in a chaos of plunging horses and shouting men, and out of the confusion came Varric's voice, sharp now, stripped clean of its usual pleasant warmth. "Draven? On my own land, in the dark, do you have any idea what I could do to you right now?" "I know exactly what you can do," Cale called back, already moving sideways into fresh shadow, keeping every eye and every blade pointed toward where he'd stood a heartbeat ago, and not where he stood now. "You can burn a family's flock alive and call it an accident. You can invent a debt for a girl who was 7 years old and swear it under seal. You can hold a man prisoner in his own daughter's name and call it insurance." His voice rang off the stone walls of the courtyard. "I know exactly what you can do, Kestrel. The question tonight is whether you can still do it, now that half this reach is finally close enough to hear you admit it." Silence. Real silence. The kind that told Cale his words had landed exactly where he'd aimed them. Behind the great house, unseen, a kitchen door opened soundless onto the dark, and 2 shadows slipped along the garden wall toward the black gap in the hedge. Ilara, the plain worn book clutched to her chest under her cloak, and Marin behind her, leaving 20 years of swallowed silence behind her forever. They didn't stop running until they reached the tree line, where Roran waited with the wagon, false bottom already open. It was only there, in the cover of the dark trees, safe for one held breath before the next danger began, that Ilara turned and found Cale already there ahead of her, having slipped free of the courtyard's chaos the moment her shadow cleared the hedge, exactly as he'd sworn he would be. "You're bleeding," she said, seeing the graze along his forearm where a blade had found him in the scramble to break free. "It's shallow," Cale said, though his breath was still ragged from the run. "Ilara, tell me you have it. Tell me it wasn't for nothing." "I have it," she breathed, and then, because there was no more time left to hold anything back, because she had just read her father's name written in a monster's own hand, and did not know, in that moment, whether the next hour would bring her his rescue or his death, she said the rest of it too, fast, before her courage could fail her the way it so nearly had at Greywater's burning gate. "He's alive, Cale. My father. He's alive. He's a prisoner in that hold, and I have proof of every lie that man has ever told written in his own hand, and I am so afraid right now that I can barely stand, and the only thing keeping me on my feet is that you are standing here in front of me, and you came, and you're bleeding because of me, and I—" She didn't finish it. She didn't need to. Cale closed the last of the distance between them, and kissed her, hard and certain, in the cold dark under the trees, with danger still hunting them from every direction, and a stolen book of sins pressed between their bodies, and for one long, suspended moment, neither of them was afraid of anything at all. When they broke apart, breathing hard, something ancient and wordless stirred low in both their chests at once. The mate bond, dormant since the day of their binding, finally, fully waking. Ilara felt it as a pull, sudden and overwhelming, drawing her whole body toward the shift, the way moonrise draws the tide. "I feel it," she gasped. "Kale, I feel the bond, really feel it, not just the words we spoke at the chapel." "I feel it too," Kale said, wonder breaking through the danger in his voice, for the first time in 11 years. "Ilara, I haven't felt a bond like this since." He didn't finish either. He didn't need to. Under the black trees, with hunting horns beginning to sound behind them in the Iron Fang courtyard, Kale Draven and Ilara Vane shifted together for the first time. Fur breaking free of skin in the same held breath. 4 legs finding the forest floor in the same racing heartbeat. 2 wolves standing nose to nose under a thin sliver of moon, bonded now in a way no blood mark on a chapel floor could ever have made them. Then the horns sounded again, closer, and there was no more time for wonder. They ran. All of them. 2 wolves, a wagon driver flogging his team toward the border road, an old healer who had just given up 20 years of careful silence for one reckless night of courage, and behind them, fading into the trees, the furious, echoing voice of a man who had just understood, far too late, that the one thing he'd never once imagined losing was already gone. The plain, worn book of sins rode out of Iron Fang lands that night under a load of empty crates, and Varric Kestrel, standing alone now in his violated study, staring at an open panel and an empty space where a second book had sat hidden for 20 years, did not yet know it, but he had already lost the only war that had ever truly mattered. The great stone hall of the Reach Council was already full when Kale Draven kicked the doors open, and every alpha in the Northern Reach turned at once to see who dared interrupt a moot already in session. They had ridden 2 days without real rest, the worn book never once out of arm's reach, Ilara barely upright in her saddle by the time the capital's grey towers finally rose out of the morning mist. Varric Kestrel stood already at the center of the hall, mid-argument, his voice smooth and wounded as he laid his fabricated claim before a dozen watching alphas. And he turned now, pale for one unguarded instant, to see the woman he'd sworn didn't exist, walk through the doors under her own power, a plain leather book held before her like a blade. "Forgive the interruption," Kale said, his voice carrying easily across the stunned hall. "But I understand there's a matter of an oath being decided here today, and I thought the council might like to see the actual record of every oath Alpha Kestrel has ever forced on a smaller pack before you rule on this one." "This is an outrage," Varric said, recovering fast, turning to the eldest of the seated alphas. "A stolen ledger, likely forged for this very purpose, brought before us by a man with every reason to lie, to keep what he's claimed unlawfully." "I can read every figure in it," Ilara said, stepping forward. "Against the sealed record Alpha Kestrel keeps for the council's eyes, because I have been trained since childhood to find the difference between an honest book and a dishonest one, sitting side by side, and I promise you, my lords, once you see the two set against each other, there will be no doubt left in this hall which one tells the truth." Her eyes found Varric's across the stunned silence. "Fenwood, Greywater, 9 other holds whose names are written in your own hand. Alpha Kestrel, with the true debt beside the false one you actually collected. You couldn't help writing it down truly, could you? The old law wouldn't let you hide a broken oath from yourself, even while you hid it from everyone else. The eldest Alpha, a grey, weathered woman named Sarah Thorne, who had sat the Reach Council for 30 years and buried her patience with liars decades ago, held out one hand. "Bring it here, child. Let us see for ourselves." It took less than an hour for the truth to unravel completely. Every figure Ilara had memorized on the ride south matched, line for line, the discrepancies the council's own scribes found once they set the 2 books side by side. And it was Merrin, called forward at Ilara's request, who delivered the final blow, testifying, voice shaking but clear, to 20 years of watching Alpha Kestrel drink to families he'd ruined at his own table, and to one detail she had saved for exactly this moment, because she had recognized it the instant Bran first whispered the name Freya to her weeks before, gathering pieces of a puzzle none of them yet knew they were building. 11 years passed, near this very season, Merrin said, her old voice ringing clear across the silent hall. Alpha Kestrel paid raiders from beyond the Reach to strike a Blackthorn border village, long before he ever moved against the North in the open. I was newly come into his household that year, barely more than a girl myself, and I served the wine the night he toasted its success at his own table. I have never once forgotten it. He named the place himself, Hollowmere. He said a young mate and her unborn pup were lost in the fire, and he called it a fair opening price for a kingdom. The hall went utterly, terribly silent. Cale did not move. Could not, for one long, frozen moment, make his own body obey him, because the word Hollowmere had just detonated something in his chest that 11 years of careful walls had never once fully contained. The raid that had taken Freya, the raid he had spent 11 years believing, was nothing but cruel random chance, revealed now, in front of the entire Reach Council, to have been no accident at all. A calculated first strike in a war Varric Kestrel had been quietly waging for over a decade, and Cale Draven had been its very first casualty, long before he ever knew there was a war to fight. "You," Cale said, and his voice, when it finally came, was low and shaking with a rage 11 years in the making. "You took her from me. Not fate, not chance. You. Careless men lose careless things," Varric said, and something cold and final settled over his face as he understood, at last, that there was no smooth word left that could save him. "I built an empire, Draven. Every empire is built on someone's ruin. I merely chose whose." The old law of the Reach allowed for exactly one answer to a claim like this, made before a full council, against a crime this size, trial by challenge, alpha to alpha, wolf to wolf, under the eyes of every pack gathered to bear witness. Sarah Thorne rose from her seat, grim and final. "Alpha Varric Kestrel," she said, "you stand accused, on proof none in this hall can now deny, of forced oaths, false debts, the murder of innocents at Hollowmere, and the unlawful imprisonment of Lord Edric Vane. Under the old pact, the wronged Alpha may claim trial by challenge. Alpha Draven, do you claim it?" "I claim it," Cale said, and did not need to be asked twice. They fought in the courtyard beneath a grey sky, before every Alpha the Reach could summon on short notice, 2 wolves circling in the old way, no weapons but claw and tooth, and 11 years of grief, finally given somewhere honest to go. Varric was strong. He had not built an empire on cowardice alone, but Cale fought with something Varric had never once had to face in all his years of careful cruelty. A man with everything to lose, and no longer any fear left of losing it, because he had already survived the worst loss of his life once, and had found, against every expectation, that he could love again anyway. It was not a long fight. It was not meant to be merciful, and it was not. When it ended, Varric Kestrel lay defeated in the packed earth of the council courtyard, and Cale Draven stood over him, breathing hard, blood-streaked, victorious in a way that felt, in the end, less like triumph, and more like a debt finally, fully paid. "Cell 3, Ilara said into the ringing silence that followed, already turning toward the gates, toward the road back to Ironfang Hold, toward a father she had believed dead for a month, and had just learned, in the space of one impossible night, might still be breathing behind Ironfang's cold stone walls. "Cale, my father, we have to go now." Cale was already moving before she finished the sentence, shifting back to human, reaching for her hand, and around them the entire Reach Council rose, as one to watch the Alpha King of Blackthorn and his Luna ride out of the capital at a dead gallop, racing the fading light toward whatever truth still waited, alive or otherwise, in the dark beneath a fallen tyrant's hold. The dungeon door came off its hinges under Cale's shoulder before anyone could stop him, and the torchlight spilling into cell 3 fell across a man so thin and grey-bearded that for one terrible heartbeat, Ilara did not recognize her own father at all. "Papa!" Edric Vane lifted his head slowly at the sound of her voice, as though he did not trust it to be real, and when his eyes finally focused on the doorway, on the daughter he had shoved through a burning gate a month ago with nothing but a whispered word and a prayer, something in his ruined face broke open entirely. "Ilara," he rasped. "You made it. You actually made it to him." She was across the cell and on her knees beside him before Cale had even finished pulling the broken door aside, her arms around a father she had spent 4 weeks mourning, feeling him solid and breathing and alive under her hands in a way she had stopped letting herself hope for, somewhere around the second week of grief. "I told you Winterfen would open his door," Edric whispered against her hair, his voice cracking with 20 different kinds of relief at once. "I told you. 12 years I carried that debt, hoping I'd never need to call it in, and the one time I did." He looked past her, up at Cale, standing in the cell doorway, with his own eyes wet and unashamed of it. "You came for a stranger's daughter, on the strength of one word from a man you never even learned the name of. That's a rare thing in this world, Alpha Draven. Rarer than either of us knew, it turns out. You saved my life at Winterfen, and vanished before I could thank you," Cale said, his voice rough. "Turns out, I've had 12 years to figure out how. I just didn't know it yet." That evening, with Edric settled by a fire for the first time in weeks, and color slowly returning to his face, Ilara drew the sealed letter from her cloak at last, and held it out, not to Cale, but to her father. "I never opened it," she said. "Not once, in a month of running and grieving and nearly losing it twice over. I didn't think I had the right, not until I knew whether you were even alive to tell me otherwise." Edric's weathered hands closed around it, and for a long moment he only looked at his own wax seal, unbroken, exactly as he'd pressed it the night Greywater burned. "I wrote this thinking you'd be handing it to a stranger over my grave," he said, voice rough. "Didn't think either one of us would still be breathing to read it together." He broke the seal himself, slow, and unfolded a single page, and read it aloud. Plain, unpolished words, the last gamble of a dying man who'd asked nothing more than that whoever answered to Winterfen would hear his daughter out, and who'd written that if Cale turned her away, the debt between them would simply go unpaid forever, and Edric would rest easier not knowing which kind of man he'd turned out to be. He folded the page closed again, something like a smile breaking through the exhaustion in his face. "Turns out," he said, "I didn't need to worry. It took 3 more days to fully unmake what Varek Kestrel had spent 20 years building." Under the Reach Council's ruling, Iron Fang's stolen lands were returned, hold by hold, to the families who'd been driven from them. Fenwood's River Valley, back to Roran Ash, who knelt in the dirt of his father's old fields the morning the ruling was read, and stayed there a long time, saying nothing, needing to say nothing. Greywater Hold's ashes were cleared, and its rebuilding funded from Iron Fang's seized treasury, and Edric Vane, once his strength returned, insisted on paying back every true debt his hold had ever honestly owed, down to the last coin, because a Vane repaid what a Vane owed, real or false, and he would not have his daughter's rescue built on top of an unfinished ledger. Bran Ashwood found his sister in the 4th cell down the same dark corridor where Edric had been kept, thinner than he remembered, frightened but unharmed, and the sound he made when the door came open was not a warrior's sound at all, but a boy's, the boy Cale remembered from a lifetime ago, fighting over scraps of meat in a training yard neither of them had ever imagined would lead here. "I'm sorry," Bran said to Cale that night, unable to look at him. 2 years of small betrayals, telling myself each one was too small to matter. I know that doesn't undo." "You brought us Merrin," Cale said quietly, cutting him off. "You brought us the gate, the timing, the healer who opened the door, that saved my wife's life, and freed her father besides. A man who only ever thinks of himself doesn't do that, Bran, not even under threat. You made a mistake born of fear, and then you turned around and fixed it with everything you had left to give. That's not nothing. That's not even close to nothing." He clasped his old friend's forearm, the warrior's grip they'd shared since boyhood. "You're still my shield, brother. You always were, even through the parts you got wrong." Bran's composure finally broke, and Kale let him have the moment without comment, the way old friends do. The season turned slow after that, the way healing always does. Not all at once, but in small, steady stones, laid one after another, until a person could cross the distance without quite noticing they'd done it. Blackthorn Keep, quiet as a tomb for 11 years, filled with sound again. Merrin's kitchen laughter as she settled into a new life far from Ironfang's cold halls. Roran's occasional visits, still a little too solemn, but slowly softening at the edges. Edric Vane, regaining his strength daily, teaching Blackthorn's youngest pups the same patient art of gentling a frightened thing that he'd once taught his own daughter on a fence rail at Greywater. And on a clear night, a full year after a girl had run 3 days through burning forest and whispered one impossible word at a stranger's door, Kale Draven stood at the training yard fence and watched his wife work with a young, wary pup that had come to Blackthorn afraid of every hand that reached for it. Watched her go still and low and patient, exactly the way she'd stood with Torvin that first cold morning, letting the frightened thing choose, on its own time, to trust her. "You've got that look again," Elara called across the yard without turning around, because after a year she always knew. "The one you had the day I climbed down off that kennel fence. Only you're not glaring at me like I'm about to get myself killed this time." "No," Kale admitted, crossing the yard to lean against the rail beside her. "I'm not." Torvin, fully healed now, fully trusted, ran easy loops along the fence line in the fading light. A scout again, and a good one. Exactly as Elara had promised the first morning she'd reached her hand into his cage. The young pup finally lowered its head into Elara's open palm, and she laughed. The same free, unguarded laugh Kale had first heard directed at a wolf, and had since heard directed at himself more times than he could count. "I've been thinking about your father," Kale said quietly, once the pup had wandered off, content. "Mine and yours both, if I'm honest. 2 men who spent their whole lives believing a debt was a weight you carried alone until it finally broke you." He turned to look at her, the woman who had walked into his cold, careful life and rebuilt it stone by stone without ever once asking his permission to do it. "I spent 12 years thinking Winterfen was a debt I'd die never paying back, and then your father's daughter walked through my door, and it turned out he'd never sent me a debt at all." "What did he send you then?" Elara asked, though she already knew, watching his face. "He sent me my whole life back," Kale said. "I just didn't understand for a long time that a life like that isn't something you pay back, Elara. You don't clear it like a ledger and call the account settled. You just live it, every day, as well as you can, and you let that be the payment. That's the only kind this debt was ever going to take." Elara reached up and pressed her palm flat against his chest, over the old scar from Winterfen that had never fully faded, over the steady, unafraid heartbeat beneath it. "Then stop keeping score, husband," she said softly. "There's no ledger left between us. There never really was one. Just 2 people who both thought they had nothing left to lose, standing at the same wall at the same time, finding out they were wrong." Kale Draven, the lonely Alpha King who had built 11 years of iron walls around a heart he swore would never again be foolish enough to love, drew his wife in against him under the darkening sky, wolves running easy and free in the yard below them, and understood, with a certainty he had never once felt in all his years of having nothing left to protect, that he was exactly, finally, where he was always meant to be. I hope this story stayed with you long after the ending. If you enjoyed it, please like the video, subscribe for more amazing stories, and share your own ending in the comments. I can't wait to read what you come up with. See you next time.